Consejos para potenciar la creatividad desde la familia.
The second question is to ask for advice or tips to be able to foster creativity from the family, from actually family setting.
Well, I can't quite see the audience from here. Oh, I can now. Good. Thank you. Can I ask the audience a question here? How many of you in the audience have 2 or more children? Could you put your hand up? Well, let me suggest something. I'll make a bet that if you have 2 children or more, that they are completely different from each other. Is that right? That you would never confuse your 2 children, that they have, you'd never wonder which one you were speaking to at the moment. I'm one of 7 children, and we love each other, but we're completely different. And the reason I say this is that to be creative is a very practical thing. It's not a single power that people are creative or they're not creative. You have to be creative at something, at doing something, which is what The Element is about, the book I published last year, El Elemento in Spain. So part of nurturing creativity in the family is to recognize the differences between your children and the different ways in which they might be creative, to recognize the different talents they have. It's also a question of creating opportunities for them to pursue these talents and of encouraging their confidence in their own creative abilities. So I think the family has a massive role to play. It's also recognizing that I think children sometimes are given too many different things to do. I live in Los Angeles, and it worries me sometimes that our children are over-programmed. Every minute they have is given over to some activity or other. So it's a sensitive judgment that parents have to make. But it's about looking at their individual talents and helping to nurture and encourage them. I think that's the primary task.
La tercera pregunta sería, imaginemos que un líder llega a una organización, ¿no? ¿Cómo puede sacar el potencial creativo de ese equipo?
The third question would be, let's imagine that a leader enters an organization. How can we draw the creative potential out of a team?
Well, I always connect creativity to intelligence. And what I mean is that the definition I've given of creativity is having original ideas that have value. And a lot of people think they're not creative, I think because they haven't discovered their particular creative powers. Really creative teams, to me, are successful because they embody the characteristics of a single mind. What I mean is that intelligence is diverse, but diversity is a very important principle in creative teams, as I was saying in the presentation. The second is that creative teams have a dynamic process. And I know one of the people I interviewed for The Element was Paul McCartney. How many of you in the room know about the Beatles? Good. Well, I'm from Liverpool and he is from Liverpool, and I got to interview him for the book. And he was saying that, well, firstly, the Beatles as a group, when they first appeared, I think people thought they were almost identical people, 4 people with the same abilities and attitudes. Actually, as we got to know them better, and eventually when they broke up, we could see they were very different people. They had very particular characteristics. But I remember he said that he and John Lennon used to sit and write songs together. I think they wrote, as the group, they wrote and recorded about 300 songs. And all of them, with a very few exceptions, were classics. They were groundbreaking songs. He said he and John Lennon when they sat down together to write songs, always set out to write something original, and they never wanted to repeat what they'd done before. And he said we would sit down with our guitars, and one of us might have an idea, and we'd work on those ideas, and we wouldn't get up until we'd got a song, a new song. He said sometimes it took 20 minutes, and sometimes it took an hour. He said, I can't remember it taking ever more than 2 hours. But he said he remembers one day they worked on this song, and then they went and had a drink in the pub. And neither of them wrote music. And he said to John Lennon, Paul McCartney said, over the drink, he said, what if we can't remember the song in the morning that we've just written? And John Lennon said, well, if we can't remember it, why would anybody else remember it? And it seemed to be a very good example of how the kind of creative energy that's generated between two people draws from not having the same talents, but from having different talents. And of course, the four of them had very different talents. So the second big thing with the group is that they have a process which is dynamic, where their differences aren't a problem, they are a strength. And the third is that creative teams are unique for the job they do. They come together, they work together for the job for the time it takes, and then they may split up. So this to me is a really crucial skill for leaders in the 21st century. It's how to pick the right team and how to give them a process and the right sort of targets so that the work they do is both realistic and it's productive.
Bueno, ahora una pregunta, probablemente la más difícil de todas. ¿Cómo hacer aflorar la creatividad en la administración pública?
This is probably going to be quite a difficult question. How can you make creativity come to the surface in public administration? How can you make creativity flourish?
In the public sector?
Public sector, yes.
Yeah.
Public administration. The public administration.
By the way, one of the great advantages of being on Skype is that if you ask me a difficult question, I can just turn you off. So please make sure there are no more difficult questions or the line may go blank. Well, it is actually, it's a very interesting question because I was saying in the principles I set out that creative organizations are flexible, they're curious, and in a commercial organization there's a big incentive to be flexible and curious because one of the primary purposes of the organization is to make profit. And you know, I think I mentioned that I spoke about 10 years ago at a meeting of the Fortune 500 companies that were attending a gala dinner in London. And I was comparing the top 10 of the Fortune 500 companies, the top 10 companies in the world, with the same list 10 years previously. And this was, I think, 5 years ago. The top 3 companies were American companies. 10 years previously, the top 3 companies had been Japanese. So in the 10 years, the top 3 companies in the world had dropped down the list to somewhere like 300 in the 500 list. This is the fate of corporations, commercial corporations that don't innovate, that don't keep pace with change, that they become subject to climate change. Well, one of the difficulties, I think, for public sector organizations, for bureaucracies of that sort, is that often there isn't the same immediate consequence for a lack of flexibility. And public sector organizations can quite quickly become encased in habits of behavior, into rhythms of procedures which are unsuited to the purposes that they exist to serve, but there isn't a large external incentive for them to adapt and to change. And I think, therefore, the challenges often for encouraging flexibility in bureaucracies are rather different. The incentive for people in bureaucracies is often to avoid innovation rather to embrace it. However, the fact remains that with the pace of change in public life, it's becoming more and more important in public sector organisations to embrace it. And I have worked with a number of them. I worked with the heads of organisations in the government in one of the large Canadian provinces, and they have a very interesting strategy. Can you see me okay? My screen has gone blank here.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, let's see if we can reconnect the video as well. I think it's important you can see me because I'm wearing such an attractive shirt.
I think we can see you now.
What?
We can see you now.
Oh, you can. Okay, I can't see you, but I can hear you. All right, we'll try and get the image back as I carry on. This is a large public sector administration in the provincial government, and they have a very interesting strategy. They want to promote innovation throughout the public sector in the province, and to do that, they brought together 100 of the key departmental leaders of the provincial government who were identified as being interested in being innovation champions. And I worked with them on an outline strategy as a workshop, and then we had a series of meetings with other representatives across the province to identify ways in which the procedures and ways of working throughout the provincial government could be challenged, they could be refreshed, or they could be renewed. So I think the opportunities for innovation are just as great, they're just as urgent, but it needs real leadership within the administration to make it happen.
Bueno, pues con esta pregunta concluimos, porque la verdad es que ha sido magnífica la intervención del señor Ken Robinson, y le despedimos con un aplauso. Muchas gracias.
With that last question, we're going to finish. So a round of applause for your intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.